KirTop here, and this is 100 Discoveries Under the Sea that rewrote the history of civilizations. People without names. When discussing pre-dynastic Egypt, a sense of emptiness is almost always evoked, as if a fog lay between the desert stone circles and the first pharaohs. Archaeology reveals settlements, rituals, elites, and complex burials, but almost no names. This is strange because the things found in layers dating from the late 4th millennium BC require coordination, power, and a sense of status. Such societies cannot exist without leaders, but these leaders seem to have been deliberately erased from history. In Hierakonpolis, archaeologists excavated the so-called Tomb 100, dating to approximately 3300 BC. Its walls were covered with paintings depicting boats, processions, scenes of violence, and symbols of power. Some of the earliest narrative depictions in Egyptian history. This level of decoration is not found in ordinary burials and requires not only resources but also people capable of organizing a complex ritual and overseeing its execution. At Abydos, in the el-Ka'ab necropolis, are massive burial complexes from the late pre-dynastic period, including Tomb Uj, where hundreds of ivory objects, rare stone artifacts, and the first known tokens with proto-writing were found. These tokens do not contain the names of rulers, but record territories, resources, and offerings, thus indicating the existence of a centralized government. At the same time, these burials lack what would become the norm within a couple of centuries: royal titles, formulas of power, and clear identification of the ruler. Instead, symbols are used: animals, signs, scenes of submission. Authority is already present here, evident in the scale of the tombs and the amount of resources invested, but it is not yet personalized. California's stone redwoods. Near the town of Calistoga, California, lies one of the largest petrified forests in the world. This natural monument is approximately 3.5 million years old. Giant sequoias once grew here, but a powerful volcanic eruption covered the grove in ash and lava, permanently halting the decay process. In an oxygen-free environment, the wood gradually became saturated with mineral solutions, and the organic matter was replaced by silica. This created precise stone replicas of the tree trunks, preserving the bark, growth rings, and internal structure of the trees. The first mention of this site dates back to 1857, when settlers accidentally stumbled upon petrified trunks during construction. Scientists later confirmed that they were the fossilized remains of redwoods, which at the time of the catastrophe were over 2,000 years old. The area quickly became known as the Calistoga Stone Forest. In the late 19th century, the site passed into private hands and eventually became an open-air museum. In the 1880s, writer Robert Louis Stevenson visited, writing about his impressions, and in 1915, one of the tree trunks was displayed at the Panama Pacific Exposition in San Francisco. Today, a tourist trail about a kilometer long runs through the area. Many of the tree trunks are still half buried, but their structure is perfectly preserved. The Calistoga Forest remains a rare example of how a volcanic catastrophe, rather than destroying nature, preserved it in stone, creating a unique record of North America's geological history. Göring's final makeup. There's a legend that Hermann Göring, considered one of the most influential people in Nazi Germany, second only to Hitler, painted his nails and wore women's clothing before his death. It sounds pretentious, so it clings to everything we already know about him: silk robes, furs, perfume, theatrical uniforms with endless medals. Göring truly adored striking fabrics and ostentatious luxury. At receptions at Karen Hall, he wore fantastic jackets. At home, he sported robes and pajamas, loved thick aromatic mixtures, and used powder. Cartoonists immediately added details to their works, and people began to claim that Göring really did paint his nails and dress in women's clothing. Photographs and personal belongings reveal a taste for displaying status: velvet, silk, fur, massive rings, and bespoke tailoring. This is the men's luxury of the 1930s and 1940s, elevated to the level of operetta, and it worked perfectly for the image of the powerful aesthete. Hence the endless nicknames about the theater marshal. Against this backdrop, caustic stories grew. Easy to quote, they sound like the ultimate disgrace. But there is no evidence for this. No procurement documents, no photos, no property records. Nuremberg added fuel to the fire. After Göring's arrest, they publicly undressed him. They showed him his closets of robes, discussed his toiletries, and savored his meticulousness. how he folded his shirts, how he achieved the perfect fold. All this was presented as femininity, although in essence it was narcissistic self-exactingness. Psychological portrait and caricature merged and the meme spread. There are also everyday details that only strengthen the legend. Auction sales of items from his wardrobe, silk underwear, dressing gowns, personal toiletries, have survived. This is enough for the media. Silk means feminine. In reality, it was the fashion of the era and the habit of wealthy men to surround themselves with expensive fabrics. There's no secret to this, but there is a carefully constructed facade. Göring loved to play the role of the Reich's first aesthete and played it with comical diligence. This story about nail polish is based on retellings. Someone said they saw it shining, without photographs, without records, without anything to show for it. The inventories and photos from searches contain silk dressing gowns, underwear, jewelry, and perfume. There is no evidence of nail polish or the wearing of women's clothing. The conclusion is simple. Ostentatious luxury existed. Evidence of painted nails or dressing up is lacking. Therefore, this remains a rumor that sounds impressive but is not supported by objects or documents. The Narmer Palette. The Narmer Palette was found in the temple complex of Hierakonpolis. It is a dark slate slab approximately 64 centimeters high, dating to approximately 3100 BC. Formerly a cosmetic palette, it is in fact an object that was never used in everyday life. It is too large, too detailed, and too ostentatious. On one side, a man wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt is depicted raising a mace over a captive. The ruler's figure is significantly larger than the others, his gesture captured at the moment of impact. Next to him is a servant, and before him is a completely subjugated enemy. On the other side, the same man, now wearing the red crown of Lower Egypt, walks at the head of a procession, examining the decapitated bodies of his enemies, laid out in a strict order. At the center of the composition are the intertwined necks of fantastical beasts, a motif that appears here in its final form. Narmer's name is conveyed by signs and inscribed within a frame, one of the earliest instances of a ruler's name being recorded alongside an image of power. The palette was placed in a temple, not a tomb. It is not accompanied by explanatory inscriptions and does not tell a story verbally. Everything present is conveyed through the poses, the scale of the figures, and the order of the scenes. A giant sand dune listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. In Dagestan, 18 kilometers from Makhachkala, lies Europe's largest sand dune, Sarikam. It reaches a height of 262 meters and covers over 1,000 hectares. Its name translates as yellow sand. The dune is part of the Dagestan Nature Reserve and is recognized as a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. The main mystery of Sarikam is that it is not located in a desert, but in a steppe and mountainous region where rainfall is frequent and trees grow. There are no other sandy areas within tens of kilometers. The northern part of the dune gradually transitions into a clay plain, while the southern part abuts a mountain range. Scientists have debated the origin of the sand since the 19th century. According to one theory, the dune formed from marine sediments of the ancient Caspian Sea. When the sea retreated, the sand layers rose to the surface as a result of tectonic processes. According to another theory, the sand was washed out of the subsurface by groundwater flows that reached the surface. Some researchers attribute the dune's formation to localized erosion and wind-driven sediment transport. In 2017, UNESCO designated Sarikam a biosphere reserve due to its unique flora and fauna. It is home to species typical of deserts, but not native to the Caucasus. The site remains closed to active research, sparking debate among geologists and proponents of alternative theories. According to one theory, an ancient buried city may lie beneath the dune, and the restricted access is explained by a desire to preserve not only the natural environment, but also the hidden archaeological layers. A camp that's not on the maps. Poland, Czyżewiec, and Karczmarka districts. The GPS shows an empty clearing. In place, grass, a smooth clearing, silence. It would seem that's all. I overlay archival Luftwaffe aerial photos and post-war photographs, and the picture changes. Two straight lines of rectangles, a dead-end path leading to a small area with traces of ditches along the edges. This is a classic diagram of a subcamp, completely dismantled before the retreat. Where the path ended in the old photo, a rock juts out in the grass, surrounded by a scattering of rubble. This is the kind of rubble they put near loading ramps. A little to the side is a dark strip of soil interspersed with melted shards of glass and brick. This is the remnant of ovens and high temperatures. At the edge of the field is a piece of barbed wire and a ceramic insulator from a communication line. And under the moss is a thin aluminum tag with a prisoner's number and a small Siemens and Halsky plate from an electrical panel. Everything fits together into a single picture: housing, an industrial hub, security, drainage, and exit to a dead-end street. In places like these, there are no display case artifacts left, the kind that look good in museums. The entire historical picture is created by the little details. The tag indicates that people with numbers were here. The manufacturer's plate explains, equipment was installed, indicating accounting and regulations. A dark strip of earth indicates furnaces and chemicals. The ramp and the dead-end street indicate regular shipments. When these details are placed together, nothing becomes a specific destination. Now, a brief overview of the method. We combine 3 layers: archival aerial photographs, a terrain model, and earthen objects. The aerial photograph provides geometry, where the barracks stood and where the path ran. The terrain confirms micro-shifts in the ground, straight corridors, a platform, and ditches. The objects provide the final proof that something truly happened here. Why do camps of this type disappear from modern maps? Because they weren't simply abandoned, they were taken over by local businesses. The boards were used for sheds, the crushed stone for roads, the rails for scrap metal. The papers were burned. Traces of Denisovans in a cave in northern Laos. In Laos, in the Tam Ngu Khao 2 cave in the Annamite Mountains, a 130,000-year-old tooth was found, which, as it turned out, belonged to a representative of the Denisovans, a subspecies of ancient people whose traces were previously found in the Denisova cave in Altai and in China. The found tooth, molar, belonged to a girl aged 3.5 to 8 years. The age of the find was determined by sedimentary rocks in the cave and amounted to 164 to 131,000 years. The close morphological similarity to the Xiahe specimen from China indicates that they belong to the same taxon and that Tam Ngu Hao 2 most likely represents a Denisovan. The anthropological material of a Denisovan in Southeast Asia was found for the first time. The authors of the publication attribute the rarity of the find to the peculiarities of the region's climate. Also in the cave were found teeth of large mammals, including Stegodon, an ancient proboscis animal, a relative of the mammoth, elephant, and rhinoceros. For the first time, traces of Denisovans were discovered in Altai, in the Denisova cave in 2010, then their genome was deciphered. After scientists found a jawbone in 2019 on the Tibetan Plateau, proving that part of the species also lived in China. According to modern concepts, Africa is considered the ancestral home of mankind, but there is still no consensus on how this process went. A number of scientists believe that there were 3 expansions of human ancestors from Africa to Eurasia. The early ancestor Homo, about 1.9 million years ago, the ancestors of Neanderthals and Denisovans, about 700,000 years ago, and people of the modern type, about 50,000 years ago. According to archaeological data, Denisovan man, an independent subspecies of ancient people, appeared in Altai after a powerful wave of migration from the Middle East about 300,000 years ago. Its traces were found in the Denisova cave, from which it got its name. Bloody Waterfall. Antarctica is a continent of records, and one of the strangest is the Scarlet Stream flowing from the Taylor Glacier. The ice layer here should be sterile, but the meltwater is colored a deep red. Until recently, scientists blamed iron. A rusty stream, everything is clear. However, an analysis in 2023 showed otherwise. Nanospheres were found in the water, tiny particles smaller than a virus with an iron core covered with calcium and aluminum. While they are under the ice, the color is invisible. As soon as the water breaks out, the shell instantly oxidizes and the stream turns into liquid blood. The source is an ancient salt lake sealed millions of years ago. Salt lowers the freezing point and simultaneously releases heat during crystallization. Therefore, the water remains liquid even at -10 degrees Celsius. Bacteria live in a closed salt system, isolated since the time when modern ecosystems had not yet formed on Earth. They feed on sulfur compounds, doing without light and oxygen, a direct scenario for possible life under the ice of Europa or Enceladus. Bottom line, blood falls is not mysticism or algae. It is a demonstration of how chemistry, microbes, and geology can work together to create a completely alien picture on their home planet. Haigerloch's uranium cubes. Haigerloch is a small town in southwestern Germany. Right beneath the church, in a chamber carved out of the rock, an attempt was made in 1944 to launch a nuclear reactor. Not a bomb, but a reactor designed to sustain the reaction and run for hours. Werner Heisenberg's team suspended hundreds of cast uranium blocks, the very same cubes, in a tank on steel cables. Below was heavy water as a moderator. Surrounding them was a protective layer, cables, and instruments. The idea behind the design was simple. Slowed neutrons were more likely to hit the uranium, and the circuit had to be maintained without any external tricks. If this was successful, the reactor was considered operational. What went wrong? Material was chronically short. The uranium arrived in batches of varying quality, heavy water was in short supply, and the chamber itself was cramped. The lattice of cubes couldn't be accelerated as much as desired. Engineers adjusted the distances between the suspensions, rearranged the clusters, added rows. The setup refused to come to life. It was almost on paper, but not in the real world. In April 1945, the Allied scientific team from Alsace arrived. The chamber was opened, the tank drained, and the suspensions cut off. The uranium, documentation, and some equipment were taken away as trophies. The main part went to the United States. The rest was distributed among research centers. And from that moment on, a life of its own began around the cubes. Stories of another one found periodically surface. In a university basement, in a physics room, in a museum. They are easily recognizable. A trace of a loop on the edge, a darkened surface with an oxide skin. Sometimes Haigerloch cubes with no provenance appear at auctions. Hence the legends. Drowned during evacuation. Buried in the forest, disposed of in pockets. The paper passports for many of the samples have indeed been lost, so rumors outlive the facts. According to the conspiracy theorists' hottest theory, the uranium cubes from Haigerloch allegedly went not only into the reactor's suspension grid, but also into the strapping of the Die Glocke project. Supposedly, the heavy metal was used as a shielding element or as components inside the bell-shaped machine near Silesia. Add to Haigerloch the concrete circle in Ludwigowicz, the purple Zerum 525, and Kamler's name, and the theory is complete. Uranium blanks for the bell, which was supposed to dampen gravity, were cast under the church. But when you strip away the emotion, nothing remains. There are no blueprints, no release documents for the bell, no photos of the components to which these cubes are even remotely connected. The surviving samples from Haigerloch have a clear purpose in a conventional nuclear facility. Their geometry and the traces of the suspensions suggest a reactor grid, not a time machine. Therefore, the cubes equals bell parts theory remains a legend without confirmation, like the bell itself, which most likely exists only in stories. Full scan of the Titanic. For the first time in history, a full digital 3D scan of the Titanic has been made. Hundreds of thousands of images were collected into a model that allows us to examine every centimeter of the sunken liner. The scan showed many details that were previously inaccessible: destroyed decks, personal belongings, individual structural elements. The experts studied the stern, portholes, and the hull break especially carefully. For example, they discovered that one of the portholes exactly matched the eyewitness accounts of the moment of the collision with the iceberg. The model also confirmed something important. The engineering compartment continued to supply electricity until the very end. This allowed the lighting to be maintained longer and gave passengers more time to evacuate. This is exactly what matches the stories about how the light on the ship burned until the very end. The scan provides more than just a picture. It is a tool with which the Titanic can be studied as if it were not at the bottom, but standing on dry land. And there is something particularly strange about this, to look at what has perished with such clarity. The flesh of the fish god. The Dogon people live in the cliffs of Bandiagara. Once every 60 years, they hold the Sigi festival. The main ritual is to bring out a huge mask of Nomo, According to legend, Nomo is an amphibious creature. It once flew in a copper egg that thundered like a thunderstorm, fell into the lake, and came out of the capsule half man, half fish. Nomo showed people star drawings. It indicated that next to the bright Sirius there is another, dark and very heavy star. Astronomers discovered this white dwarf, Sirius B, only in the 19th century, but the Dogon talked about it long before telescopes. So that his lesson would not be forgotten, Nomo, according to myth, shared flesh, gave people pieces of his skin as sacred food. That is why the Dogon still call his power Nyama Nomu, life inside the fish god. They keep clay tablets with a pair of stars in secret sanctuaries. Scientists still cannot understand whether this is ancient knowledge or a late hint from missionaries, but the Dogon themselves are sure. The copper egg really did fly in and will return one day when the time comes for the next Siggy. The history of UFOs is always a mixture of fear, technology, and myths. Let's keep this in mind and move on. 17 skeletons on the grounds of a Welsh monastery. British archaeologists in Pembrokeshire, West Wales, have unearthed the remains of 17 skeletons in what they believe belonged to the monastery of the Holy Savior before the Reform King Henry VIII seized their property. The monastery existed from the mid-1020s until its collapse in 1536 to 1541. In the last years of the monastery's existence, Henry VIII, King of England and Wales, ordered the confiscation and sale of many church properties. This happened after he severed relations with the Catholic Church. The medieval monastery of the Holy Savior, which was inhabited by Dominican monks, black monks, distinguished by the black color of their clothes, was no exception in this sense. According to Murphy, the Crown sold all their property, but part of it, in particular the burial ground that belonged to the monastery, remained untouched until the 17th century. We don't know for sure whether these remains belonged to monks, since a variety of people were often buried in monastic cemeteries. There were only shrouds on the buried, and the arms of all the skeletons were crossed on the chest. During the Middle Ages, approximately 500 to 1500 AD, monasteries were popular places for burial. Initially, the monastic cemeteries were intended only for the monks themselves, but quickly became popular places for the burial of the laity. The current excavations are taking place ahead of major construction in the area, with plans to build a 3-story grocery store with a bar and a rooftop terrace in the area. Road underwater. When diving in the Hawaiian Islands, you expect to find many things: lava, craters, rare corals, but not a road, and certainly not like this. At the depths near an underwater volcano, divers noticed a strange area. Perfectly straight stone slabs, yellow in color, laid out in a row. The surface is like a sidewalk. The structure is like masonry. The angles between the slabs are too precise to be random. All this did not look like a geological formation, but like a trace of something artificial. The video quickly spread across the internet. The comments are standard: Atlantis, ancient path, aliens. But the researchers themselves were puzzled. They did not find signs of human intervention in the area, but they could not immediately explain its origin. Later, geologists got involved. According to their version, this is the result of volcanic activity. Basaltic lava quickly cooled and cracked under the pressure of water, created polygonal faults. The structure we perceive as a road is actually a natural formation, but the way it looks is confusing because it's too recognizable. We're used to nature creating chaos, and here there's order. You look at these slabs and can't shake the feeling that someone has already been here. Not you first, not the fish. Someone. Maybe it's just an optical illusion or an effect of shapes, but there's a line where science gives an answer, and you still continue to doubt. Collection of paintings. In 2012, a discovery in Munich shocked the global creative community. A billion-dollar collection of paintings confiscated by the Nazis was found in a modest-sized apartment. Among the works were works by such masters as Marc Chagall, Pablo Picasso, and Henri Matisse. This collection represents lost treasures of European art, many of which were thought lost for decades. The paintings fell into the hands of the Nazis as a result of a massive campaign to confiscate works of art that the regime considered degenerate or belonging to Jewish families. Many of these works were confiscated from their owners in the pre-war and war years, and after the war they were considered lost or destroyed. The discovery of this collection was made possible thanks to the investigative actions of the German authorities, who were investigating a case of tax fraud. The investigation led to a search of the apartment where these priceless works of art were discovered. The collection included both well-known masterpieces and lesser-known works that are nevertheless of great artistic and historical value. The find caused an international outcry because it raised questions about ownership, restitution, and moral responsibility. For many descendants of Jewish families stripped of their treasures by the Nazis, the discovery offered hope for the return of lost works of art that had become a symbol of their history and heritage. Göring's final makeup. There's a legend that Hermann Göring, considered one of the most influential people in Nazi Germany, second only to Hitler, painted his nails and wore women's clothing before his death. It sounds pretentious, so it clings to everything we already know about him: silk robes, furs, perfume, theatrical uniforms with endless medals. Göring truly adored striking fabrics and ostentatious luxury. At receptions at Karen Hall, he wore fantastic jackets. At home, he sported robes and pajamas, loved thick aromatic mixtures, and used powder. Cartoonists immediately added details to their works, and people began to claim that Göring really did paint his nails and dress in women's clothing. Photographs and personal belongings reveal a taste for displaying status: velvet, silk, fur, massive rings, and bespoke tailoring. This is the men's luxury of the 1930s and 1940s, elevated to the level of operetta, and it worked perfectly for the image of the powerful aesthete. Hence the endless nicknames about the theater marshal. Against this backdrop, caustic stories grew. Easy to quote, they sound like the ultimate disgrace. But there is no evidence for this. No procurement documents, no photos, no property records. Nuremberg added fuel to the fire. After Göring's arrest, they publicly undressed him. They showed him his closets of robes, discussed his toiletries, and savored his meticulousness. How he folded his shirts, how he achieved the perfect fold. All this was presented as femininity, although in essence it was narcissistic self-exactingness. Psychological portrait and caricature merged and the meme spread. There are also everyday details that only strengthen the legend. Auction sales of items from his wardrobe, silk underwear, dressing gowns, personal toiletries, have survived. This is enough for the media. Silk means feminine. In reality, it was the fashion of the era and the habit of wealthy men to surround themselves with expensive fabrics. There's no secret to this, but there is a carefully constructed facade. Göring loved to play the role of the Reich's first aesthete and played it with comical diligence. This story about nail polish is based on retellings. Someone said they saw it shining, without photographs, without records, without anything to show for it. The inventories and photos from searches contain silk dressing gowns, underwear, jewelry, and perfume. There is no evidence of nail polish or the wearing of women's clothing. The conclusion is simple: ostentatious luxury existed. Evidence of painted nails or dressing up is lacking. Therefore, this remains a rumor that sounds impressive but is not supported by objects or documents. Why this road was flooded. On the coast of Israel, archaeologists have found an unusual road that was flooded many years ago. This section, which was recently explored, was part of an ancient trade route used in ancient times. The road passed through several settlements and led to a port, but for some reason it was flooded. The mystery of this road is that its surfaces are much better preserved than one would expect from an object several thousand years old. The stone slabs that were used for paving are almost undamaged, which makes scientists wonder about the technology used in its construction. However, the mystery that puzzles is that no one knows exactly why the road was flooded. Some suggest that it was the result of an earthquake. Others, that the water could have gotten in due to changes in the climate or the sea. All this remains an open question, and research continues. Tax documents and shopping lists. The Egyptian mummy of Chaddingstone Castle in Kent has long been a mystery to experts. In order to read the name of the deceased, it was necessary to unfold the burial veil of strips of papyrus pages, which was impossible without damaging the mummy. In 2017, researchers developed a scanning method that allowed the hidden text to be read without harming the mummy. The 3,000-year-old mummy of a man named Eretirore. Used papyrus was used to form the mummy's wrappings, but the text on it was obscured by putty and plaster, so the contents remained unknown for centuries. During the scan, scientists saw, in addition to the name, records of the life of the Egyptians, including tax documents and shopping lists. Funeral ring with the eye of the deceased. This unique Victorian ring, created in the late 19th century, has the unusual feature of using the glass eye of the deceased as the centerpiece. Dr. Lindsay Fitzharris says the first artificial eyes appeared in the 15th century and were made of gold with colored enamel trim. By the 16th century, Venetian craftsmen had discovered a new way of making artificial eyes from glass that could be inserted into the eye socket. Although the first glass prostheses were quite rough, uncomfortable, and brittle, the Venetian method was considered the best in the world at that time. By the mid-19th century, craftsmen from the Thuringian region of Germany made a breakthrough by perfecting the glass formula to create artificial eyes that were of better quality. However, in the 1940s, glass gave way to plastic, which was less uncomfortable and more durable. China kept secret discovered 12th century frigate. The find led to the emergence of a museum of underwater archaeology in China. In 1987, the British firm Maritime Exploration was looking for the wreck of the Dutch East India Company in the South China Sea, but instead came across a 30-meter merchant ship dating from the Southern Song period, 12th century. Divers reported that the sunken ship, judging by the amount of cargo, was at the very beginning of its journey. The wreck was nicknamed Nanhai No. 1 because it was the first find off the coast of the city of the same name. A layer of silt 2 meters thick contributed to the preservation of the wooden hull and cargo, including porcelain, sung coins, and silver bars. The lack of investment and suitable technology meant that Nanhai No. 1 remained untouched on the seabed until 2002. All this time it was watched by the Chinese naval forces. The military stopped local fishermen from fishing on the site, claiming that there were still active bombs from the Second World War on it. Only in December 2007, the Nanhai No. 1 and its precious contents, with a total weight of 15,600 tons, were finally lifted from the bottom and transferred to the Silk Road Maritime Museum in Guangdong on Hailing Island, which was built specifically to accommodate the sunken ship. It became the first museum of underwater archaeology in China. Nanhai No. 1 has been placed in a custom-made seawater tank, and to prevent rotting and damage to the ship, it is covered with silt and kept at a stable temperature. Under these carefully controlled conditions, archaeologists have continued to study the wreck ever since. For example, in 2018, scientists established the dates of a sea voyage. One of the jars was dated 1183. Earlier, the Colombian military showed photos from the sunken frigate of the 16th century. The ship has not yet been explored, but perhaps its raising will inspire the Spaniards to create their own underwater museum. A continent underwater. At the bottom of the Strait of Madura near the island of Java, archaeologists have found something no one expected. Not a sunken ship, not artifacts, but an entire ecosystem. Layers of earth in which the remains of Homo erectus, fragments of skulls, and traces of life, about 140,000 years old, are preserved. Along with them are the bones of giant bulls, turtle shells, traces of bones broken to extract bone marrow. This is not just an ancient human site. This is a fragment of a submerged continent, a vanished world that once connected the islands to the mainland. Scientists call it Sundaland. Today it is underwater, but back then it was plains, something like an Asian savanna with rivers, forests, and herds of large animals. On the bones of animals, archaeologists found traces of processing, like that of mainland Homo erectus. But until now, it was believed that Javanese groups did not have such skills. Now it is clear there was contact between populations and cultural exchange too. People passed on to each other methods of hunting, disassembling carcasses, processing shells. This speaks not only of technology but also of memory, of the transfer of knowledge. In addition to traces of hunting, remains of mollusks and river sharks were found. Everything indicates that there was once a rich, living, complex landscape here where man was part of the ecosystem, and now all this is on the bottom. Sundaland sank underwater tens of thousands of years ago. Without noise, without traces of cities or temples, it simply disappeared. And if it were not for random finds on the seabed, we would not even know that it existed. This reminds us, huge chunks of history can disappear not from a catastrophe, but from time. And all that remains is a fragment of bone left in the silt. Merlin's parchment. Archives often look boring. Dusty folders, bills, names of long-forgotten people. And so it was in Suffolk County, in an old English estate, an ordinary 16th century ledger, and suddenly, under the leather binding, old French text with red and blue initials appears. The archivist stops. An investigation begins that will lead to the most mysterious legend of Britain, the story of Merlin and King Arthur. The parchment turned out to be a fragment of a 13th century manuscript, when legends about the Knights of the Round Table were at the peak of their popularity. Specifically, it is part of the sweet Vulgate du Merlin cycle, plots describing how Merlin acted after Arthur's coronation. Less than 40 such copies have survived, and each one is unique. But this one was sewn into the cover, like trash, because in the 16th century, old parchments were often used for bindings. The paper was expensive. Scientists could not touch the find. It was too fragile. Then technology came into play. Multispectral imaging revealed faded ink. X-rays created to study fossils allowed us to look inside the book. And it became clear, this is a new scene, previously unknown. 2 episodes. In the first, Gawain fights the pagan kings at Cambanek. In the second, a blind harpist with a white dog appears during a feast. He charms everyone, asks permission to carry the standard in battle, and disappears. Then it becomes clear that it was Merlin who changed the course of events. Magic, a mask, a legend. But this is not the main thing. The main thing is that all this could have remained in the cover forever. The story written by monks 7 centuries ago survived dozens of generations, wars, oblivion, and surfaced only because one person noticed a strange pattern on old skin. Corral, U-boat headquarters in the forest. Under Berlin, among swamps and ancient pine trees, lies a place long considered a myth. It was simply called Koralla, a secret base from which German U-boats were controlled, despite having no direct access to the sea. The dense forest near Bernau served as a communications hub for the Atlantic, and if a submarine disappeared somewhere in the ocean, this is where its last signals would arrive. From the air, this place appears to be an ordinary patch of forest. But beneath the moss are kilometers of cables, concrete antenna rings, tunnels, and bunkers. All that remains of the Kriegsmarine's underground communications headquarters, built in 1943. Back then, the Reich's best radio operators were brought here. Amplifiers, repeaters, cryptographic machines, even backup generators in shock-proof chambers were housed here. Koralla was more than just a communications center. It was the brains of submarine warfare hidden underground. When Soviet troops approached Berlin in 1945, base personnel received orders to destroy equipment. Documents were burned right in the concrete corridors, safes were melted down, and some underground passages were flooded. After the war, Corral disappeared from maps. For decades, locals spoke of noises from the ground, of antennas extending deep into the forest, of a blue light that occasionally broke through the moss. Legends multiplied because no one knew what exactly remained beneath the forest. In 2019, archaeologists entered the area for the first time. They expected ruins, but what they found was a labyrinth. Dozens of rooms with collapsed ceilings, slabs marked with radio equipment, the remains of telephone switchboards, and aluminum plates with unit codes. One of the corridors sloped downwards, leading to a concrete shaft filled with water. Scanners revealed another level beneath it, still unexplored. The strangest thing was the acoustics. In the Corral dungeon, sound behaves unnaturally. Footsteps are muffled. Echoes return with a delay, as if a void remained underground that holds the sound. Local diggers call this the station's breathing. There's an old British intelligence report dated June 19, 1945. It says that the base may have been testing the Drachenruf protocol, a radio code for calling submarines from a distance of over 5,000 kilometers. The document ends. What this signal was, or whether it even existed, has never been proven. But the archives confirm one of the last radio intercepts by Reich submarines did indeed coincide with the last communication session recorded near Bernau. Today, Corral stands silent. The concrete is overgrown, the doors are locked, the forest has reclaimed its land. But if you put your ear to the stone, you can hear a faint hum, perhaps the wind, perhaps the memory of the equipment. And everyone who goes down there says the same thing. It feels like the station is simply waiting for an order that never came. The world's first fossilized navel of a dinosaur. Dinosaurs are usually depicted as majestic, almost fantastic creatures. It is almost impossible to imagine that they really existed in the real world, walked on the same earth as people. However, scientists have discovered a unique fossil that instantly makes dinosaurs a little more alive. It turns out that ancient reptiles had the equivalent of a navel. Researchers recently studied the first known fossil of such a mark. Let me remind you that in humans and other mammals, the navel remains after the umbilical cord that connected it in the womb with the mother's placenta falls off the newborn. Dinosaur embryos did not have umbilical cords, and they developed inside the egg, not in the female's abdomen. The embryo was attached directly to the yolk sac of its egg, and nutrients entered the body of the embryo through a slit-like opening in the abdominal cavity. From this gap, a long, thin umbilical scar remained, which remained on the skin throughout the life of the dinosaur. The specimen, which drew the attention of an international team of paleontologists, was discovered back in 2002 and has since been exhibited at the Senckenberg Museum in Germany. The fossilized skin belonged to Psittacosaurus, a herbivorous dinosaur about 2 meters long that lived on Earth 130 million years ago. The specimen was found in China, and until recently, no one noticed the navel on it. The researchers found the scar on the petrified skin using a relatively new technique called laser-induced fluorescence imaging, LSF. So scientists identified the characteristic scales surrounding the long umbilical scar of Psittacosaurus. Similar scars can be seen in some modern lizards and crocodiles. Forbidden texts, 2,000 years old. In China, archaeologists have discovered several ancient bamboo plates with hieroglyphs, the deciphering of which has shed new light on the history of the Qin dynasty Ban. Archaeologists have discovered 6 well-preserved bamboo plates covered with hieroglyphs. The deciphering of these texts sheds new light on the history and evolution of Chinese reading habits. Artifacts were found during excavations in the province of Hunan, located in central China. The work was carried out in the city of Yiyang. The relics themselves were found at the Tuzishan historical site. They are ancient pieces of paper. According to experts, the age of the artifacts is approximately 2,000 years. They date back to the early period of the Western Han Dynasty. The excavations were carried out in 2013. However, it is only now that Zhang Chunlong, the head of the excavation team, has made public the results of a study of the findings made at that time. According to him, there are unusual records on 6 bamboo plates. In fact, this is the correspondence of people who discuss offering books among themselves. Archaeologists believe that the texts discuss the lifting of the ban on the private collection of books. For the first time, such a ban was introduced during the reign of the Qin dynasty. As evidenced by these bamboo plates, after the ban was lifted, borrowing, donating, and collecting books became a social trend. Later, both the royal family and local governments accumulated an unprecedentedly rich collection of books. During the reign of the Western Han Dynasty, people began to read more books. Libraries began to appear. People in ancient times recycled old things. Garbage is generated daily, and still a huge part of it is sent to landfills. It seems that people have only recently learned to recycle at least some of the household waste, but this is not so. Past generations took care of things and tried not to throw anything away. And it's not just our grandparents. Scientists have found that even ancient people gave a second life to things. In 2000, scientists found the Kesem Cave, which became a real sensation in the scientific community. The cave was able to preserve a lot of evidence of life here 200 to 400,000 years ago. Traces of a fire, simple utensils, bones. And at first, Italian and Israeli archaeologists worked with the largest finds, but then they turned their attention to small pieces of stone, which were clearly tools. Tools such as chisels and side scrapers were so small that archaeologists had doubts that they were actually used. In order to find out the truth, the tools were examined several times in a variety of ways. For example, spectroscopy was carried out, and as a result, traces of skins, meat, plants were found on the once cutting surfaces. This led to the conclusion that the tools were actually used. But why were they so tiny? It is possible, scientists say, that these tools were made from other, larger tools, and when they became unusable, they made new ones. At first, scientists thought that these were just fragments, but the analyses carried out proved that these were independent tools. The scientists concluded the hominids realized that you cannot throw away the thing, but make a new one out of it and use it for smaller jobs. This allowed them, for example, to process the skin better. Miniature tools developed fine motor skills, and man evolved. the ancient genome of Escherichia coli. When you think of royal jewels, a 400-year-old gallstone is unlikely to come to mind. However, a group of scientists have discovered something of great value inside calcified pellets taken from the gallbladder of an Italian prince who passed away in the 16th century. Remains of early E. coli have been found in gallstones, and researchers at Canada's McMaster University have used them to reconstruct the first ancient genome of E. coli bacteria. This is necessary in order to trace the evolution of the notorious superbacteria over the past 400 years. The results, published in the journal Communications Biology, may allow researchers to eventually determine when E. coli acquired antibiotic resistance. Gallstones are visible in the red rectangle, which contain fragments of E. coli. The mummified remains of Giovanni d'Avalos were discovered in the Abbey of St. Domenico Maggiore in Naples in 1983, along with those of other Italian Renaissance nobles. It is believed that a Neapolitan nobleman who died in 1586, at the age of 48, suffered from chronic inflammation of the gallbladder due to gallstones. In addition to forming gallstones, E. coli can cause food poisoning, diarrhea, urinary tract infections, and pneumonia. Escherichia coli is also known to be resistant to antibiotics, giving it the name superbug. The research team explained that the full evolutionary history of the bacterium remains a mystery, including when it acquired resistance to antibiotics. This is yet to be found out. The most dangerous manuscript in the world. Marie Curie is a famous experimental scientist, an outstanding chemist, and a radioactivity researcher who received 2 Nobel Prizes, one in 1903 in physics, the second in 1911 in chemistry. But why are her notebooks considered dangerous? The answer does not lie in the knowledge they contain. Marie Curie, together with her husband Pierre Curie, discovered the radioactive elements polonium and radium and developed methods for isolating radioactive isotopes. When scientists discovered radium, they had no idea about its harm to the body. Therefore, no protective measures were taken. Samples of the substance were carried in pockets and stored without precautions. Marie Curie died in 1934 from aplastic anemia, a blood disease caused by radiation. Many of the scientists who worked with her also died of leukemia and other radiation-related diseases. While working in the laboratory, Curie received a huge dose of radiation and became radioactive herself. After her death, she was buried in a lead coffin that blocks radiation. Personal belongings, including notebooks, were transferred to the National Library of France, where they are stored in lead boxes, as they remain radioactive. Today, access to Marie Curie's notebooks is difficult. To view her manuscripts, you must sign a disclaimer form at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France and obtain permission. Viewing of records takes place in a special room away from other reading rooms of the library. The visitor must wear a protective suit and use a dosimeter. Experts have found that the radiation dose for a person in a protective suit working with Curie notebooks is insignificant. Even with regular contact throughout the year, the maximum radiation dose will be about 10 USV microsievert per hour. For comparison, during a flight at an altitude of 10 kilometers, a person receives 5 MSVH. Thus, a 2-hour flight from Berlin to Barcelona will give the same radiation dose as a year of working with Curie notebooks. The Curie notebooks remain the most dangerous known manuscripts due to radioactivity. Reading them without a protective suit is extremely dangerous. Marie Curie's personal belongings will not be touched without protection for about 1,500 years, since the half-life of radium-226 is 1,600 years. Flying chariots. Ancient Indian poems describe flying machines as if they were reports on modern technology. In the Ramayana, Prince Rama rises into the sky in the Pushpaka Vimana. The body is shiny. The windows are illuminated. The craft takes off vertically, like the sun, raised by thought. In the Mahabharata, 2 Vimanas engage in battle, release metal arrows that resound like thunder, and depart, leaving behind a tail of fire. Later, in the Samarangana Sutradhara, 11th century, King Bhoja suddenly speaks in almost technical language. Inside the Vimana, there is a mercury chamber surrounded by iron rings. When the mercury is heated, a force is created that carries the device through the air. Scholars argue how much of these texts is real memory and how much is poetic metaphor. But the details are striking. the mention of mercury as a working fluid, the description of a vertical takeoff, a separate shield to protect the passenger from the heat. On the frescoes of Ellora and the walls of Angkor, you can see streamlined capsules with a cone of fire below, too similar to a jet stream to be an accident. Skeptics remind us the manuscripts are late, they could have been forged by alchemists. Mercury has always been a symbol of immortality for the Indians. But why then do they depict not gods on a cloud in the temples, but clearly mechanical machines? So far, not a single archaeologist has found material details of the Vimana, but the legends are alive. In India today, they say that heavenly chariots will return when people again understand the language of metal and mercury. Perhaps a hint that the technology is still stored somewhere. The future of humanity on Mars. Elon Musk does not abandon the idea of colonizing Mars. He is confident that Starship automatic stations will land there as early as 2027, and by 2031, the first people will be able to set foot on the red planet. But how will society work on Mars? Elon Musk claims that the Martian colony should be completely self-sufficient without being tied to earthly states. At the same time, he advocates the rejection of representative democracy in favor of direct popular governance. A similar system existed in Veliki Novgorod, Russia from 1136 to 1478. The townspeople gathered at the Veche and decided important issues themselves: laws, peace treaties, the reign of the prince. In fact, Musk is proposing a similar model for the first Martians. In his opinion, Mars is a chance for humanity to start from scratch and survive if the Earth is on the brink of disaster. An imprint in the sea. There is a tiny island in the Adriatic Sea. Its area is only 0.14 square kilometers. It is uninhabited. There is no pier, buildings, or even paths. Only stones. But if you rise above it from the air, you will see something that is not visible from the ground. The entire island is penetrated by tens of kilometers of stone walls. They twist, intersect, form loops, circles, and lines. The entire structure resembles a giant fingerprint. The island is called Baljanak. Several centuries ago, farmers from the neighboring island of Caprije came here. They planted grapes, olive trees, and manually, stone by stone, built protective walls from the wind. Without cement, without technology. Only the strength of their hands and patience. Even the numbers are impressive. On an island 1.5 kilometers long, 23 kilometers of walls, and on the entire Sibenik archipelago, more than 100 kilometers laid by hand. Today, these walls are protected by UNESCO as a monument to human labor, but no one lives in Balanak. The walls remain, and the people have left. A timeless sword. When archaeologists opened a flooded tomb in Hubei province in 1965, they found a sword inside that had been in the water for about 2,500 years. It lay in a wooden sheath, unpreserved, unprotected, but it looked like it had been made recently. The blade gleamed. The pattern was clear. It cut through paper like a blade. On the surface was an engraving with the owner's name, Gujian, King of Yue. This sword is not just a weapon. It was made with a precision that is difficult to explain. The alloy, the polish, the tightness of the sheath, everything was at the highest level. But the main thing is that it has survived centuries, wars, and complete oblivion and remained intact. Scientists are still not sure how this is possible, but the very fact that such an object has reached us in working order is already a discovery. This sword serves as a reminder that a thing can preserve history better than any words. Ancient offensive stone. The discovery was made by a volunteer participating in the archaeological excavations. The stone was discovered near the English city of Hexham during the deciphering of ancient Roman inscriptions on the defensive Hadrian's Wall. The inscription Secundinus Cacator was carved on the stone in the 3rd century, which translates into English as Secundinus Shitter. Nearby was a painted penis. Latin epigraphers have noted that the Romans usually used the image of the phallus as a symbol of good luck or fertility. According to them, in this case, the penis increased the strength of the insult. A stone 40 centimeters wide and 15 high was found by former biochemist Dylan Herbert. He made the discovery at the end of his 2nd week of volunteering at the dig. The author of the stone clearly had big problems with Secundin, since he was confident enough to publicly state his thoughts on the stone. I have no doubt that Secundin was as surprised as we are when he saw the inscription while wandering around this place 1,700 years ago. According to experts, each carved letter and penis, which took some time to complete, leave no doubt about the depth of the scribe's feelings. In total, at Hadrian's Wall, a defensive fortification that the Romans built in 122 to 128, they found 13 stones with phalluses carved on them. Immortality of Greenland sharks. There has been an unexpected twist in the case of Greenland sharks, famous for their longevity, which may provide a clue to the mystery of longevity not only of these fish, but also of people. These sharks, which live in the cold waters of the Atlantic and Arctic seas, can live up to 500 years. One of the oldest sharks, which was born around 1624, is older than Peter the Great. Scientists from the University of Copenhagen determined its age using carbon dating. Despite the fact that Greenland sharks are rare due to their habit of living at depths of several hundred meters, scientists are actively studying them to understand the secret of their longevity. Previous studies have shown that a slow metabolism plays a key role. The pace of life theory suggests that life expectancy is directly dependent on the speed of metabolic processes in the body. However, recent data indicate the importance of habitat. Greenland sharks live in cold waters where the temperature can drop to minus 1.8 degrees Celsius. Living in such conditions slows down all chemical and biological reactions in their bodies, which may explain their immortality. In addition, they live in depths where there are practically no natural enemies except humans. Professor Holly Shields from the University of Manchester believes that the isolated environment also contributes to their longevity. The metabolism of these sharks remains stable throughout their lives, which is not typical for most animals. Scientists did not find significant changes in the metabolic activity of their muscle tissue with age. In the future, the study of shark tissue at the Arctic University of Norway should help to understand how climate change and pollution affect marine life in the long term. Ghost ships in the air. I want to tell you about two of the most famous ghost ships from the Norwegian sagas. The first case is the Trøndelag Fjord around 875. Fishermen were pulling their nets and suddenly saw a drakkar right above the tops of the pine trees. It was moving quietly, without wind. The sail glowed bluish, as if illuminated from within. One guy, not believing his eyes, threw a harpoon. The rope tensed as if it had caught something heavy, but at the same moment the ship became transparent and dissolved. The harpoon plopped back onto the grass, wet as if it had broken through the fog. The second episode happened 3 centuries later on the island of Klosterøy. It was Sunday lunch. People were in church. Suddenly a small ship hung over the roof. The boards and mast were translucent like smoke in the sun. The anchor dropped and tenaciously clung to the roof. A sailor came down from the hatch, but he moved strangely, as if the air around him was thick. The priest told the parishioners not to panic and to help. The men climbed onto the roof, lifted the anchor, and immediately the ship was pulled upward. The sailor climbed up the chain, the drakkar slowly went into the clouds and disappeared. Scientists explain these stories in earthly terms, mirages, fata morganas, or bright northern lights that people drew to the familiar shape of a ship. But in both stories, there are too many everyday details. A sail, a rope, the weight of iron in their hands. Therefore, for folklore, these are not just lights in the sky, but real encounters with something foreign, translated into the language of sailors. Legends have lived for more than 1,000 years. Sometimes in Norway, they still say that before a storm over the fjord, you can see a drakkar that goes not on the water, but right in the sky. The oldest map of the world has been deciphered. The British Museum has revealed the secret of one of the oldest maps of the world, a clay tablet from Babylon, created about 3,000 years ago. The so-called Imago Mundi, found in the city of Abu Haba, Sippar, in Iraq, has been kept in the museum's collection since 1882. The tablet depicts a simplified whole world as imagined by the inhabitants of Mesopotamia. The center is occupied by a rectangle of the Euphrates River. Around it are circles and rectangles denoting cities, including Babylon. Everything is surrounded by a bitter river, the salty waters of the Persian Gulf, and the Mediterranean Sea. According to cuneiform specialist Irving Finkel, this is a schematic reflection of the space where people lived and died, and beyond it, according to the tablet, There were 8 remote regions. The Akkadian text on the top and back of the map tells the story of the creation of the world and recounts one version of the story of the Great Flood. According to it, around 1800 BC, God commanded King Utnapishtim to build an ark, the remains of which were supposedly left behind a bitter river on a mountainside. A missing fragment of the tablet discovered in 1995 helped scientists decipher the story more accurately. In addition, the Babylonian god Marduk is mentioned, as well as fantastic creatures such as the Scorpion Man and the lion-headed bird Anzu, confirming the rich mythological world of the Babylonians.
Secret cities of the Amazon. A whole network of lost ancient cities has been discovered in the Amazon. They were found using LiDAR technology dubbed lasers in the sky. The technology has been adapted to monitor what is happening under the rainforest canopy. Cities built by the Kasarabe communities between 500 to 1400 BC AD are located in the forest of Llanos de Mojos in Bolivia and have been hidden for centuries under the dense canopy of trees. Many complex and intricate structures have been found in the cities, unlike any previously discovered in the region, including 7-meter-high terraces covering an area equivalent to 30 football fields and 30-meter-high conical pyramids. An international team of researchers from the UK and Germany also uncovered an extensive network of reservoirs, dams, and checkpoints stretching for miles. The discovery challenges the notion of the Amazon as a historically untouched landscape, the researchers say, showing it was home to early urbanism created and managed by indigenous peoples over millennia. There are monumental structures just a couple of kilometers apart, but they are connected by 1,000 kilometers of canals and dams, bringing together reservoirs and lakes. Until the end of the 20th century, there was skepticism that the Amazon region could support anyone other than hunter-gatherer tribes. The Moxos Plains on the southwestern edge of the Amazon are flooded for several months of the year during the rainy season, making them unsuitable for permanent habitation. However, in recent decades, there has been evidence of irrigation, earthworks, large cities, dams, and channels that often lead for many kilometers in a straight line through the savannas. Once the images are taken, the vegetation in the images is removed on a computer, and thus a digital model of the Earth's surface is created, which can also be displayed as a 3D image. During this process, 2 surprisingly large areas of 1.5 and 3 square kilometers were discovered with a dense 4-level settlement system. It is not yet possible to estimate how many people lived in these cities. However, the layout of the settlement indicates that it was quite densely populated. The architectural layout of the large settlements of the Kasarabe culture indicates that the inhabitants of this region created a new social and public landscape. The scale, monumentality, and labor involved in building civil and ceremonial buildings, water management infrastructure, and the spatial dispersal of settlements all differ from Andean cultures. The complex, interconnected settlements of southern Amazonia far exceed them in scale. Famous nations with an unknown future. On the pages of historical books and textbooks, one can meet such peoples as Palovtsi, Aztecs, or Phoenicians. And this is not surprising because all of them, to one degree or another, left their mark. However, today, few people are interested in what became of them. Did they disappear, or do their descendants still inhabit the planet? And I'll start with the very Aztecs, whose temples have survived to this day. Many people remember this people for their rituals, but for some reason, few people pay attention to their cultural development. But they highly valued poetry and theatrical performances in which musicians and acrobats participated. In addition, they were engaged in sculpting sculptures and dishes, as well as carving wood. What happened to them? In the 16th century, the Spaniards arrived on their territory and found the city of Mexico City. It is easy to guess that today the descendants of the Aztecs are the Mexicans, who are trying to preserve the culture of the people who fell at the hands of the Spanish conquerors. But if this people lived already in our time, then the Mayan civilization appeared even before our era. This people was remembered for achievements in the fields of mathematics and astronomy, and their exact calendar more than once made a fuss. Perhaps many more discoveries would have awaited them ahead if it were not for the Spaniards again, who brought with them many diseases unknown to the Indians. Today, in Mexico and Central America, you can find about 5 million people who speak Mayan languages. All of them united in communities and went to live in villages, where they are engaged in agriculture and selling their products. The The Phoenicians were an outstanding people because it was their language that formed the basis of many modern alphabetic systems. It was among them that there were prominent merchants and sailors, as well as glass and ceramics craftsmen. But just acquired wealth did not provide their state protection. So back in the 4th century BC, the Phoenicians disappeared, and other countries such as Lebanon and Syria have settled on their territory today. Remember how the Gauls were shown in the Asterix and Obelix movie series? So this Celtic tribe was indeed considered barbarians, although in fact they cannot be called savages. Their rather complex society revered the Druids and advocated gender equality. And yet, the Celts were one of the first among Europeans to wear pants. Already in the 1st century BC, most of the Celtic peoples sunk into oblivion. Only the British part remained, living in the territories of Wales, Scotland, and Ireland. Despite the fact that this people has ceased to exist fully, their culture continues to live and is actively sung by people from all over the world at various annual festivals. Surely everyone has heard about the Incas, who lived in the 12th century in the territory from Chile to Ecuador. But few people know that poverty and unemployment were not allowed in this empire, which they fought with the motto, "Do not lie, do not steal, do not be lazy." What is it about this people? The creation of a lunar calendar as well as a method of transmitting secret information using quipu, a complex interlacing of knots and ropes. And once again, a promising civilization fell due to the Spaniards, who brought a smallpox epidemic to their land. It is known that the Polovtsi were nomads who did not try to create their own state, but simply moved from the territory of Central Asia. However, it is unlikely that many have heard the opinion that the representatives of this people look like blue-eyed blondes with mongoloid features. In the 13th century, the Polovtsi ceased to exist, merging with other peoples and adopting their way of life. Well, I will finish with the Bulgars, known today as the Bulgarians. Unlike the Polovtsians, they founded their state in the 7th century. After the adoption of religion, these people became close to the Slavic culture so much that even the oppression of the Ottoman Empire did not win them over to the side of the Turks in 5 centuries. True, the independent country known to everyone today, Bulgaria, appeared only at the beginning of the 20th century. Elements of life in asteroid samples. NASA analyzed samples from the asteroid Bennu returned by the OSIRIS-REx mission and found organic compounds in them that are key to the origin of life. The findings include amino acids, ammonia, and formaldehyde, which could have been involved in chemical reactions that led to the formation of proteins and DNA. Scientists have confirmed that the samples contain 14 of the 20 amino acids used by living organisms on Earth. They have also found minerals that indicate the possible presence of water. These findings strengthen the hypothesis that asteroids like Bennu could have delivered important components to Earth for the emergence of life. The Reichsmarschall's Holy Relic. The name of Göring's estate, Karenhall, is not a play on words, but a monument to one woman. Karin Axelina Hulda Falk, a Swede from a noble family, died in 1931. Göring adored her so much that he built an entire world around her memory. In the Spreewald Forest, a house museum of his life, hunting lodges, collections, and among all, Karin's mausoleum, grew up. Thus, the Reichsmarschall's Holy Relic was born. Love transformed into architecture. The story seems almost surreal. First, Karin was buried in her homeland with full honors, quietly, in a family-like manner. Then, when Göring was already ascending as a politician, the remains were transferred to Germany, to a specially constructed burial chamber, Karenhall, a stone slab, a niche for the sarcophagus, torches, hunting emblems and coats of arms, and inscriptions of loyalty. He took guests there as if to a personal temple. In speeches and interviews, Karin became a symbol of pure love, which he preserves forever. It was a propaganda gift, a marshal who neither drank nor caroused, but kneeled before the memory of his wife. But then a disturbing plot unfolds. It's the spring of 1945, and the front is approaching Berlin. Göring orders Karenhall to be blown up to ensure that nothing falls into the hands of the Russians. Before the explosion, the sarcophagus is opened. There are accounts of the remains being taken and hidden in the nearby woods. Others say they are transported to a shelter in a communications vehicle, changing the location twice a week. When people try to reconstruct the route years later, they come across not just one point, but a whole chain of secret burial sites. In this confusion, legends are born. The ashes were dissolved in the lake, the sarcophagus was carried off by looters,
or it was moved to the monastery crypt and exchanged for a replica. The more people tell how it was, the more obvious it becomes that each has its own ending. There is also a very mundane story. After the war, Cairn Hall was dismantled for houses and barns. Stone portals, stairways, panels from hunting lodges. Police reports mention unmarked marble slabs, carved railings removed from an outbuilding. The mausoleum is gone, but the details live on nearby, underfoot in the new homes of ordinary people. The strangest thing is the final identification. Karen's remains were finally found and returned to Sweden in the early 1950s, but the path to official reburial was wrought through forensic examinations, comparisons, private letters, and lengthy bureaucratic procedures. Newspaper articles began to circulate. Have they brought back the one? The family said yes, the documents matched, but a legacy of legends remained because the story had been circulated as rumor for so long. Ultimately, the fate of the woman with whom Göring had lived for several years became a post-war conundrum. Where was she buried in 1945? Who moved her? Why was the location changed? There were more questions than answers. Inside, everything was subordinated to this cult. A separate room for her letters and photographs, a medallion with her name on the owner's chest, a portrait of Karen in every stately room, a quiet visit to the mausoleum for select guests before a hunt. Even the name of the estate, Cairn Hall, was like a seal on every invitation. Personal history became a routine. The date of death was marked as a memory, and any important meeting began at the sarcophagus. Monster burrows. There are thousands of tunnels in South America. Some are as narrow as animal burrows. Others are like the corridors of a military base, 4 meters wide and hundreds of meters long. Who dug them? Water and lava are out of the question. Geologists unanimously say, not nature. There are furrows on the walls as if from claws. In one of these caves in Argentina, they found the answer, the skeletons of 2 giant sloths. They weighed 4 tons each. Their claws were up to 20 centimeters long. That's what they needed tunnels of this size for. It is believed that they dug burrows for generations to raise their offspring and hide from the glacial climate. And narrower passages could belong to other monsters, ancient giant armadillos. Their modern descendants also dig, but on a smaller scale. And here the question arises, what else lies beneath our feet if such tunnels could be dug not by people, but by animals? Ancient labyrinth. Modern remote sensing methods give archaeology new tools for understanding the past. One striking example is the study of the area around Rujim el-Hiri, an ancient complex of stone circles northeast of the Sea of Galilee. This mysterious monument clearly shows how satellite images allow us to look at the landscape from a completely different angle. Scientists analyzed photos of the area within a radius of 30 kilometers and discovered numerous megalithic structures, massive circles with thick walls and mysterious flower fences near rivers. All of them, according to one hypothesis, could have been elements of irrigation, defense, or cattle pens. In addition, the images show mounds of different shapes and sizes. Perhaps these are burials or signal hills. No less curious are the results of geological measurements. It seems that the territory itself has shifted over the past millennia, which is why the hypothesis about the astronomical purpose of Rujim el-Hiri has come into question. Satellite images show multi-layered construction and archaeological palimpsest, where later structures were built on top of earlier ones. Such studies open the door to the distant past. By comparing satellite data, excavation results, and geophysical analysis, scientists hope to reconstruct a picture of the life of the ancient inhabitants of the Levant and better understand why they erected such monumental stone labyrinths and surrounded them with complex agricultural systems.
Treasure older than the Iron Age. Researchers have finally uncovered the mystery of 2 unusual artifacts from the gold treasures of Valena. A pair of pieces of jewelry, partly of extraterrestrial origin, have been found in Iberian Bronze Age treasures. The dull bracelet and the rusty hollow hemisphere decorated with gold turned out to be forged from metal that fell from the sky in the form of a meteorite. The discovery was made by Salvador Rovira Loren, former head of conservation at the National Archaeological Museum of Spain. His work showed that metalworking technologies and techniques in Iberia 3,000 years ago were more advanced than previously thought. The Treasures of Valena cache includes 66 items found in 1963 in what is now Alicante.
These pieces are considered a prime example of Bronze Age jewelry in the Iberian Peninsula and Europe. Two pieces of jewelry, a small hemisphere and a bracelet in the shape of a hrivnia, have elements that archaeologists have called iron. This posed a problem since the Iron Age on the Iberian Peninsula began around 850 BC, and gold jewelry dates back to between 1500 and 1200 BC. The difference between meteorite and terrestrial iron is the high nickel content of meteorite iron. Despite the rust, the results of the study showed that the hemisphere and bracelet were made from meteorite iron dating back to approximately 1400 to 1200 BC.
Cold dragon. While examining the fossilized remains of a creature found in the Canadian province of Alberta, London-based paleontologists have discovered a previously unknown creature dubbed Cryodracon boreas, cold dragon. With a wingspan of up to 10 meters and a weight of 250 kilograms, the species has proven to be one of the largest flying animals in history. It belongs to the Ajdarchidae family, a pterosaur species often confused with pterodactyls, and lived during the Cretaceous period about 77 million years ago. The cold dragon had a wingspan of up to 10 meters and weighed about 250 kilograms, making it one of the largest flying reptiles in history. Dinosaur remains, parts of wings, legs, ribs, neck vertebrae, were discovered 30 years ago in Canada, but paleontologists have assumed all this time that they belong to the already known species of pterosaur, Quetzalcoatlus northropii, discovered in Texas. Most of the skeleton belongs to a young reptile with a wingspan of about 5 meters, but one large neck bone belonging to an older individual suggests that the adult animal had a wingspan of up to 10 meters. Cold dragons were carnivorous and preyed on small animals, lizards, mammals, and baby dinosaurs. Unlike most groups of pterosaurs, Ajdarchids are generally considered animals that have been adapted to inland habitats despite their ability to cross oceans. Remains of Cryodracon boreas include parts of wings, legs, ribs, neck vertebrae of two different individuals. Despite the large size of the body and the distribution of these reptiles in North and South America, Asia, Africa, and Europe, scientists were able to find only fragmentary remains of a few species of Ajdarchids. However, the remains of a new species of pterosaur are perfectly preserved and therefore are of value to paleontologists. Stone cubes. Not far from Albuquerque, New Mexico, a group of tourists came to the edge of a canyon. At first glance, they are ordinary rock formations, but the longer you look, the more you get the feeling that something is wrong. The edges of the cliffs are perfectly straight. The edges are smooth, as if they were cut not by time, but by something sharp. In some places, the stone masses form clear cubes. Each weighs about 100 tons. There are no signs of processing, but there is no chaos of nature here either. Everything is too geometric. Comparisons immediately began online. Someone remembered the Bimini Road in the Bahamas, mysterious stone slabs going underwater. Someone, the megaliths of Baalbek. But still, the main reaction is the same. It looks wrong, too right to be natural, too unwieldy to be man-made. Scientists, of course, can explain a lot. Weathering, crystal geometry, pressure, faults. But visually, it is not convincing, because when you stand next to these forms, you do not get the feeling that nature did this. The question arises, if it is really artificial, then who did this and why? This is not the first and not the last place where nature seems to accidentally depict someone's work. But sometimes there is a suspicion that everything is the other way around, that it is not nature that imitates technology, but we who have not yet understood who was here before us. Face of Amenhotep III. Amenhotep III ruled ancient Egypt 3,400 years ago at the height of its power. Considered one of the richest men in history, he was revered as a living god and was the grandfather of Tutankhamun. Now we can see his true face thanks to scientific reconstruction. Amenhotep III led Egypt to unprecedented prosperity and international power. There are more statues of him than any other pharaoh, but his face has never been reconstructed. An international team of scientists decided to show us what this man looked like. Michael Habicht, an archaeologist at Flinders University in Australia, notes that Amenhotep III looked different than in his statues. This suggests that all the Egyptians who lived after his death did not know what he really looked like. His face after reconstruction expresses the calm of a man who stood for peace and lived in an era of economic prosperity.
Research showed that the pharaoh was obese, sick and inactive, suffered from dental problems, was almost bald, and had a height of only 156 centimeters, which made him one of the shortest pharaohs. Brazilian graphics expert Cicero Moraes digitally reconstructed Amenhotep III's skull using data from living donors to determine the size and position of the nose, ears, eyes, and lips. The reconstruction also took into account historical data about his strong physique. This is the first close-to-reality image of the face of Amenhotep III, which includes not only the face, but also clothing and accessories. Amenhotep III died between the ages of 40 and 50, leaving his successor a country at the peak of power and wealth. In diplomatic letters, foreign rulers begged him to send them gold, describing Egypt as a country where gold was as abundant as sand. There is speculation that Amenhotep III's mummy may have been covered in gold leaf, making it look like a statue of a god. It is also suggested that the pharaoh was a great connoisseur of women, importing hundreds of foreign harem ladies. After the death of Amenhotep III, his son Amenhotep IV changed his name to Akhenaten and established the cult of the sun god Aten. However, his son Tutankhaten restored the cult of Amun and changed his name to Tutankhamun, becoming one of the most famous pharaohs thanks to the discovery of his tomb in 1922.
UFO over Sakhalin. A video of a mysterious object spotted in Russia over the Sakhalin Mountains is gaining popularity on the internet. According to Newsfroll, the video appeared on social networks and quickly went viral. Presumably, the filming was done from a military helicopter. The footage shows a metal disc slowly hovering over a mountain range, reflecting sunlight. It is clearly larger than a standard drone. At some point, the object changes its trajectory and disappears behind the clouds. The recording is accompanied by the characteristic sound of a helicopter, which, according to supporters of authenticity, confirms the reality of the filming. There is only one question: what was it? Letter from a Babylonian schoolboy. A tablet written by Idin Sin for his mother Zenu in the city of Larsa in the 18th century BC is a unique testimony to the reign of Hammurabi. This artifact, housed in the Louvre Museum in Paris under the number TCL 18111, is written in Akkadian. Idin Sin expresses disappointment in a letter to his mother over the quality of the clothes she sent him. He compares his clothes to those of his peers and repeatedly tries to make his mother feel guilty, hoping that she will send him a new outfit. Idin Sin writes, "May the gods Shamash, Marduk, and Illabrat protect you for my sake. The clothes of the young people here are improving every year, and you are allowing mine to become worse. You made me bad clothes, although the son of Adad Idin, the son of my father's assistant, has 2 sets of beautiful clothes. Despite the fact that you are my birth mother and he was just adopted, his mother loves him, but you don't." This letter shows that the problems and experiences of teenagers have remained the same for thousands of years, despite changing eras and cultures.
700-year-old ship. Many years ago, sailing ships were the main means of transportation by which people traveled the world, and most importantly, they traded goods from one end to the other. Most of the ships that sailed the waters of the earth ended up on the bottom of the oceans as a result of an attack by enemy forces or natural disasters. Only a few well-preserved ships are kept in naval museums, while most rest on the ocean floor. An interesting archaeological find occurred during construction work in Tallinn, Estonia. While the workers were digging the ground for the foundation of a new building, they discovered a 25-meter-long vessel believed to be a 13th century Hanseatic ship. The ship was found at a depth of 1.5 meters underground near the port of Tallinn, near the former mouth of the Herjapia River, a waterway that no longer exists. The ship's hull was found to be almost intact and very well preserved in the ground, compared to other similar ships discovered in the past. Archaeologist Michael Tammet analyzed the wood for dendrochronology, and the results showed that the wreck dates back to 1298. According to historical data, despite the unusual location where the wreck was discovered, in the 18th century this place was still underwater, and only at the beginning of the 20th century was it converted for infrastructure development. The place itself is quite close to the port of Tallinn. In 2008, another similar wreck was discovered just 50 meters from this place. The ship was assigned to the Hanseatic community, a powerful trading network that stretched from England to Russia. In the 13th century, this trading network was perhaps one of the largest economic powers in the world, trading in goods and luxury goods. The ships that made up this network were built to last hundreds of years and withstand countless storms. The Black Book of Carmarthen. The oldest manuscript that mentions King Arthur and Merlin is the Black Book from Carmarthen. The book is considered a collection of poems from the 9th and 12th centuries. In 2015, the pages were examined with UV light and photo editing. To the delight of the researchers, they found something invisible to the naked eye. Among the lines were hidden human faces and poems. Also in the margins, medieval readers, mostly at the end of the 16th century, made notes. The manuscript is the earliest manuscript written in Welsh around 1250 AD. It was probably created by a single author who collected poems about Welsh folk stories and legends from the Dark Ages. But the Black Book's greatest significance is how it demonstrates that even well-researched manuscripts can provide a wealth of new information. The mysterious tomb of Genghis Khan. Death overtook the great Mongol commander in 1227 during the Crusade, and for many years scientists and researchers have been wondering where the founder of the Mongol Empire was buried. There are legends that the body of Genghis Khan was returned to his homeland and buried along with a huge amount of valuables. Therefore, it has been a main goal for researchers, scientists, and ordinary treasure lovers for centuries. It is believed that after death, for the sake of the beloved Khan, many people were killed. All passers-by who came across on the way to the burial place were executed by soldiers. After the huge grave was dug by the slaves, they were also killed, and then they killed the soldiers who killed the slaves. Although there is a version that the soldiers independently and voluntarily committed suicide in order to serve Genghis Khan even after death. Further versions of the legend about the burial of the commander diverge. The first of them says that the course of the river was changed, which to this day hides the grave. The second suggests that after the burial, a herd of horses was released which trampled all traces of the excavated earth. Today, the Mongols still appreciate and revere Genghis Khan. The country does not look for his burial because they believe that it is a great sin to violate the will of the founder of the Mongol Empire to be secretly buried. Therefore, researchers from other countries can only build theories and conjectures, explore the area on their own or with the help of drones, but neither the state nor the residents will allow historical excavations. Matriarchy in Crete. Scholars studying the Minoan civilization have noted that in Crete, women were portrayed as strong and influential, in contrast to men. This may indicate matriarchy in their society. The Minoans who lived on Crete were noted for their advanced art and trade, as well as the expansion of women's rights in the Bronze Age. Professor John Younger of the University of Kansas noted that women in Minoan frescoes and pottery are depicted in luxurious clothing and jewelry, while men are presented in a simpler form. Please note that now women generally also look more attractive than men. Minoan women actively participated in social events and religious rituals, which distinguishes them from traditional domestic roles. Scientists suggest that the worship of the goddess in Crete could be evidence of matriarchy. The figurines of the snake goddess and the fresco Women in Blue confirm the important role of women in Minoan culture. The presence of pools in the central places of the palaces shows that women were treated adequately during menstruation, unlike other ancient peoples. Odessa catacombs. Huge underground labyrinths are hidden underground in Odessa. The year of the first stay of people in it is considered to be 1813. This is the year written on the wall. During these years, there was a plague epidemic in the city. Perhaps the catacombs served as a shelter for local residents. During World War II, when the city was occupied from 1941 to 1944, these dark and labyrinthine dungeons became a secret hideout for partisan heroes. Imagine a network of underground paths more than 2,500 kilometers long where you can get lost, like in a huge anthill. It was here in the dark and cold that the partisans set up their secret bases. They lived in these dungeons, planned attacks on the enemy, and even printed leaflets calling on people to resist. The catacombs were an ideal place for secretive fighting. The enemy could not easily find or capture them. The partisans used their knowledge of underground labyrinths to shock the enemy, suddenly appearing where they were not expected and disappearing without a trace. It was dark, damp, and very difficult to live in these dungeons, but thanks to the courage and resourcefulness of the partisans, the catacombs became one of the symbols of the unbroken spirit of Odessa. In fact, the history of these labyrinths is so ancient that it has even acquired some legends, one of which says that in the depths of the catacombs lives a short man covered with wool. To survive, he eats bats. Mysterious accessory from the future. Archaeologists have discovered wall carvings depicting objects similar to modern handbags. Some of these images are about 12,000 years old. The earliest were found in Turkey in the ruins of the megalithic temple of Göbekli Tepe, where strange images are engraved on the columns of the ancient temple. Similar motifs have been discovered in Mexico, Iraq, and South America, raising many questions about the possible use of such objects by ancient civilizations. Although the images resemble handbags or clutches, experts believe the ancient ruins are more likely to depict baskets. Some believe that the concept of a handbag may have been invented by ancient civilizations. The first modern bag appeared in 1841 in England, created by Samuel Parkinson. The problem is that the Göbekli Tepe temple was built in 9000 BC, and its builders could hardly have known about such an accessory. Another ancient example of a handbag was found in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs written about 5,000 years ago, where the gods hold a small square object symbolizing prosperity. Archaeologists have indeed found remains of baskets and tool bags used by the ancient Egyptians, but they cannot yet say for sure what is depicted in the hieroglyphs. Similar discoveries were made in Iraq, among the ruins of an Assyrian palace built between 883 and 859 BC, which depicts a genie with wings holding what appears to be a handbag. Historian David Miano believes that these figures, called Apkallu, were minor deities who carried water buckets made from sacred date palms rather than purses. Ancient buckets similar to the engravings were actually found in Iraq. Similar motifs have also been found in Mexico among Toltec ruins, where giant statues hold objects resembling handbags. These statues were created around 750 AD.
Lost ancient cities. Archaeologists have discovered ancient cities in the Amazon rainforest where up to 30,000 people could have lived about 2,000 years ago. This was reported in the journal Science. Using ultrasonic LiDAR, a team led by Stephen Royston from the French National Center for Scientific Research explored the area and found many structures and roads underground. Before the arrival of the Spaniards, the Quillamope and Upano peoples lived here. Royston called the site the Lost Valley of the Ancient Cities, emphasizing its exclusivity and importance for understanding the history of the Amazon. The cities found built over a vast area included residential and public buildings surrounded by agricultural fields with drainage channels. Roads connected cities, some of which were 20 kilometers long. Royston notes that local people used clay instead of stone for construction. These cities have existed since 500 BC to 600 AD, parallel to the Roman Empire in Europe, and lasted about 1,000 years.
Skulls with nails. In the southeast of Spain, among the ruins of ancient settlements, archaeologists have found something that immediately evokes an alarming feeling. 7 severed heads. Some have huge metal nails driven into them, not all the way through, but with obvious force, as if the skulls had been nailed to something. But why? At first they thought trophies of war, like the heads of enemies, displayed to intimidate. But a chemical analysis of the bones gave an unexpected result. Not all the skulls were foreign. In one city, 3 out of 4 heads belonged to people who came from afar, and in another, almost all were local. And this changes everything, because in one place, strangers were apparently executed and put on display. And in another, their ancestors were kept as relics. The heads were found near houses, inside dwellings. So this is no longer a demonstration of force, it is memory and respect. The Greeks wrote that the Gauls kept the heads of their enemies in boxes, and that Spanish mercenaries carried them on spears. But in reality, everything was more complicated.
Children's drawings in Pompeii. These findings immerse us in the everyday life of ordinary people on the eve of the disaster. Antique graffiti depicting fighting gladiators was found among the ruins of Pompeii. Scientists believe that these scribbles provide a better understanding of the way of thinking of the ancient Romans. The charcoal drawings were discovered among the ruins of the courtyard of the Casa del Secondo Cenacolo Colonnado, colonnaded house of the Second Last Supper. Researchers say the drawings were created by children probably aged 5-7 years. This is confirmed by the fact that nearby there was a silhouette of a small hand outlined in charcoal. This confirms that even ancient Roman children visited amphitheaters to watch bloody spectacles. Graffiti was found on one of the walls of the corridor near the service yard, approximately 1.5 meters from the floor level. The children probably climbed onto the scaffolding. The drawings depict 2 gladiators facing each other. Nearby is a scene of Venetia, hunting games, also with two fighters armed with long spears. They appear to be about to fight a pair of wild boars. On the right is the head of a bird of prey, presumably an eagle. In another room, most likely intended for storing amphorae, another series of drawings appeared on the walls, again at a not very high height. These are three small hands outlined in charcoal, two scenes of gladiators fighting, two figures playing with a ball, a boar, and finally, a scene of hand-to-hand combat in which one of the two fighters is lying down. Remains of the dancing dragon. Researchers from China discovered the remains of a feathered dinosaur previously unknown to science, which was called the dancing dragon. The creature lived on our planet about 120 million years ago. According to scientists, an interesting find will help shed light on the evolutionary gaps between dinosaurs and birds. A unique fossil of a flying dinosaur was discovered 10 years ago in the Chinese province of Liaoning, but it has only just been made public. During this time, Chinese scientists, together with American colleagues, studied the remains and concluded that the skeleton belongs to a dinosaur previously unknown to science. The new species was named Wulong bohaiensis, translated from Chinese as dancing dragon. The feathered dinosaur lived on the planet about 120 million years ago. Its fossils, including feathers and even soft tissue, are perfectly preserved for their age. It is about the size of an ordinary crow. The creature had a narrow, scaly head and a mouth full of sharp teeth. The dancing dragon fed on small mammals, lizards, birds, and fish. Its limbs, similar to bird wings, were covered with feathers, and two long feathers flaunted at the end of a thin tail. Despite the presence of wings, it did not fly, like other similar types of feathered dinosaurs of this period. Scientists have determined that the fossil belongs to a very young male. At the time of death, he was about 1 year old. Chinese experts hope that the interesting find will help to study in more detail the period in which dinosaurs spread their wings and began to evolve into modern birds. Time capsule in a cesspool. Archaeologists from the Netherlands, working in the center of the city of Alkmaar, have discovered impressive objects in an ancient cesspool, shedding light on everyday life in the 15th century. Among the finds, a wooden shoe made of birch, which is not grown in the country, stands out. This is a rare clog, which, according to archaeologist Nancy de Jong, has a complex design with a double heel. In total, only 44 such examples are known in the Netherlands and Belgium, and most of them are worse preserved. In addition, scientists extracted from the pit a finely made oak grain measure, a unique artifact because previously only fragments of such containers were found in the region. Until now, they were known mainly from historical evidence. Now, researchers have received material evidence of the existence of such measures in everyday urban life. The cesspool itself dates back to 1450 to 1558. At first, it served as a latrine and then was abandoned during the construction of new houses. Scientists note that residents of that time already practiced a circular economy, reusing or recycling materials and often burning waste for heating. Skull versus legend. Post-war Germany was overgrown with one of the most enduring legends. Bormann escaped. They claimed he was seen in Spain, Paraguay, and Argentina. He changed faces, ran the Nazi network, wrote letters. Newspapers loved these stories. The name of the party secretary made headlines and significantly boosted sales. The real denouement occurred not in the jungle, but in Berlin. In 1972, during excavation work along the old railway tracks near Lehrter Bahnhof, an excavator uncovered two skeletons. Fragments of uniform lay nearby. Documents had decayed, but the teeth remained. Forensic experts compared the jaws with the files of the top dentist. The characteristic fillings and bridges known from Bormann's treatments matched. The second was Hitler's personal physician, Ludwig Stumpfegger. This set of facts alone was enough to say, yes, it's them, but people love to argue. After all, legend is far more interesting than the actual truth. The bones bear typical injuries for people trying to break through a battle zone. Shrapnel marks, damage from collapses, nothing out of the ordinary. Glass microparticles were found in the jaws. The theory is simple: a poison ampule bitten open in the night. At the site, there are traces of soil and construction debris, which logically explains why the bodies weren't found earlier. Old embankments, subsequent work, layer after layer. The final point is genetics. In 1998, DNA was compared with the closest relatives on the maternal side. The match confirmed what the teeth and X-rays had already indicated 20 years earlier. It was indeed Borman. Footprints in stone. In 1952, in Texas, in the Paluxy Riverbed, workers were clearing the stone and came across a chain of clear prints. These were dinosaur footprints, large, elongated, in some places almost a meter long. There were many of them. It seemed that ancient lizards really walked along this place, one after another, leaving a path in the stone behind them. But nearby they noticed something strange, prints similar to human feet, long with the outlines of fingers. Some of them overlapped the dinosaur tracks. It was because of this that the place became a source of controversy. Some people saw a sensation in the find. Supposedly, this was proof that people and dinosaurs existed at the same time. Scientists were more cautious. Some explained the shape of the tracks by erosion, others, fakes. There are known cases when such human tracks were cut directly into limestone, then sold to tourists. There is still no exact version. But regardless of the controversy, the painting itself is the imprint of movement left 100 million years ago, and that is already amazing enough. The terrible face of an ancient man. Scientists have figured out what an ancient human ancestor looked like, a Cro-Magnon man, whose skeleton was discovered in the Isis cave in France. The face of the Cro-Magnon turned out to be truly creepy. As it turned out, he suffered from neurofibromatosis, a genetic disease that causes massive growth of benign tumors. They covered the entire face of an ancient man. The skeleton of Cro-Magnon 1, a member of the species Homo sapiens who lived about 28,000 years ago, was discovered in 1868 in the Isis cave in the French region of Dordogne in southwestern France. By the 150th anniversary of the discovery, scientists decided to re-examine the remains, restoring the appearance of a Cro-Magnon man. Cro-Magnons are the ancient ancestors of man. Their remains were first discovered in the middle of the 19th century in the Dordogne region, in the Cro-Magnon cave, from which they got their name. The Cro-Magnons found by scientists lived on Earth 35,000 years ago, and were the first of the ancestors of modern man whose remains were discovered by scientists. The secret of Buddhist monks. Buddhism is one of the most ancient religions. There are many artifacts thanks to which we can restore the history of this religion, its values and features. One of such artifacts is the collection of texts of the Tripitaka Koreana. It contains all the knowledge about Buddhism that is accumulated over decades. These are not copies of already existing texts. This is the original, which gives a complete picture of knowledge about Buddhism. On the Korean peninsula, there is Haeinsa Monastery, which is very important for the entire Asian culture. This place is remarkable not only for its beauty and tranquility that people find here, but also for the fact that completely unique texts are stored here. This collection has been accumulating for several centuries. All the canons of Buddhism are described here, and there is simply no other such complete collection. All these texts are stored on clay tablets. There are more than 80,000 of them. Sometimes, because of this, the collection of text is called the 80,000 Tripitaka. All these texts are divided into volumes, of which there are more than 6,000. The height of each such tablet is 25 centimeters, and the width is about 70. It can be said that all the wisdom of ancient people is stored in these texts, and it took a long time to study this heritage. Now the tablets are carefully guarded, but tourists have the opportunity to see these texts live. The temple in which the texts are stored is open to travelers. Unfortunately, the collection of texts was almost completely destroyed during the invasion of the Mongols. All the tablets were badly damaged, but they were such an important part of the culture that the ruling dynasty commissioned the restoration of all records. Such painstaking and accurate work took more than 10 years. In the end, all texts were restored. They tried to make the plates as similar as possible to those that were lost. For example, the first tablets were made from white birch and cherry trees, and the same types of wood were used in the restoration. In addition, for the sake of preserving the text, the tablets were framed, and this worked. Almost 1,000 years after these tablets were made, they are in excellent condition, and the text on them can be read without problems. The tablets were covered with poisonous varnish so that insects would not spoil them. Image of a car on an ancient temple.
The Sagara Madu Temple, also known as Pura Dalim Jagaraga, is located in the north of Bali, 11 kilometers east of the city of Singaraja. The temple is located in the village of Jagaraga, known for the tragic event of 1849, when during the Dutch colonization there was a mass ritual suicide of local residents. The temple was originally built in the 12th century during the reign of King Raj Sri Aji Jagaraga, but was later destroyed during the Dutch invasion. Restoration of the temple began in 1865, and its current appearance has largely been preserved since then. The temple complex includes two temples, Pura Dalim, dedicated to Shiva, and Pura Prajapat, dedicated to Durga, reflecting their mythological roles as consorts in Hinduism. The walls of the temple are decorated with carvings depicting leaves, flowers, nagas, snake-like creatures, and human figures. Pura Dalim Sagara Madu is associated with rituals of death and destruction, as it is dedicated to Shiva. In the central courtyard, there is a carved gate called Paduraksa, decorated with the head of the mythical creature Bahoma, as well as pavilions for preparing offerings and performing rituals. This temple is unique in that its walls are decorated with scenes from the Western world, such as an airplane falling into the sea, a ship being attacked by a sea monster, and an antique car. Such images appeared because Singaraja was the main seaport of Bali in the 19th and 20th centuries, through which contact with European civilization took place. Plague Cemetery. On Pushkinskaya Street in Rostov, Russia, archaeologists have unearthed the largest necropolis. Rostov residents were buried on it during the plague pandemic from 1770 to 1772. Historians are sure this is an archaeological sensation. Archaeologists have already excavated 25 graves and discovered about 100 skeletons. Most of the dead were buried with whole families, which speaks of the plague epidemic raging in this region. The first human bones in this area were found by workers at the end of April. Having learned about these finds, a group of archaeologists began excavations and came to stunning results. The found ancient cemetery is on the preserved maps. Most likely, these are the so-called mortgaged dead. That is, those who died an unnatural death. They were buried away from the fortress. At that time, there were about 10 cemeteries on the territory of Rostov. Despite the danger of contracting the plague, the dead were not escorted on their last journey anyhow. The bodies are carefully and evenly laid. In many graves, their children were placed at the feet of women. Ancient silver coins were also found in the tombs. Thus, the dead hoped to find a new and happy life in another world. The terrible plague that mowed down people in the 18th century does not pose a danger to humans today. After all, 250 years have passed. In any case, I would not recommend historians to dig up the mass graves of people who had the plague, but I strongly recommend that you subscribe to our channel and always be aware of new archaeological finds. Leave your kind comments below the video. Thanks for your views. Bye, everyone.